Hello and welcome to all MPs to the all-party parliamentary group for special educational needs and to those that are watching on Zoom. My name is Olivia Blake and I am the Labour MP for Sheffield Hallam, and I have the privilege of chairing the APPG for SEND. We're quite a new APPG, but we have already seen been quite active trying to improve things for children with SEND. Last week, I wrote to the Secretary of State for Education regarding the delay to the much needed review of SEND. I urged him to commit the resources needed to publish the findings of that review as soon as possible. A link to this letter will be posted in the chat. Just to explain the role of the APPG, we are a group of MPs from different political parties and parts of the country who have come together because we care about young people with SEND and want to try and improve things. We are not the government, nor the Department of Education, so we don't have the direct power to make changes or answer your questions, but we can and we will influence those who do. This is the fourth meeting of the APPG and the second as part of our inquiry this autumn, looking at how transitions in education for children and young people with SEND have been impacted by COVID-19. Each meeting will focus on different broad areas of need as identified by the SEND Code of Practice. This meeting will look at the experience of children and young people with cognition and learning needs. An agenda for today's meeting is on our website and a link will be posted in the chat room. For the meeting today, we have Alison, who is our BSL interpreter, and the meeting will be available to watch again tomorrow, and the video will also have captions. A particular thanks to our speakers today. We will be hearing from parents, young people, and a legal perspective as well. This is an opportunity for them to share their stories with MPs. Their contributions will be brief today, but there is an opportunity for all to make written submissions to our inquiry. Details are in the chat room and on the APPG website. We will hear from 5 speakers today, and then MPs will have the opportunity to ask speakers questions immediately after they have spoken. Attendees will not be able to ask questions as we do not have time to facilitate this today. We're particularly pleased and grateful to welcome Jimmy and Carly to speak today, who are young people with SEND who want to share their experiences. MPs will ask questions to Jimmy and Carly straight after they have spoken, but we will hear their responses to these questions towards the end of the meeting to give them time to process the questions. MPs, I ask you to please write your questions to Jimmy and Carly in the chat box, and then also ask it verbally when invited to do so. The aim of our inquiry is to draw together the experiences and research from individuals and organisations to paint the picture of what COVID-19 has been like for young people with SEND and suggest how things can be made better. We're ambitious for our inquiry, and written contributions will close on November the 15th, so there's still time to contribute. The findings will be made public and shared with the Secretary of State, the Department of Education and the Education Select Committee. Please do write and contribute your experiences, as your voice needs to be heard. The terms of reference for the inquiry are available on the website and will also be posted in the chat room. Please tweet around this meeting. The hashtag is APPGSEND, and you can follow the APPG at APPG_SEND. We will now move to hearing from today's speakers, and just to reiterate that there won't be an opportunity from people watching from home to ask questions. MPs will only be allowed to ask questions. So our first speaker, I'm really pleased to welcome Jimmy Langton, a young person with quadriplegic cerebral palsy. Jimmy is a young person with Regis, who is a wheelchair user and communicates through an eye gazer. Jimmy attends a mainstream college, currently studying level 3 media, having completed studies in football coaching. Jimmy writes interview blogs, often with footballers from local teams, with an ambition to move into sports journalism. Jimmy is an active member of a Kids Young People's Participation Team, supporting the development of SEND youth voice across the country. Welcome, Jimmy, and over to you.
Lockdown arrived whilst I was beginning my final task of my first year of level 3 creative media at my local college. I needed to pass this to continue on to my second year, so the pressure was on. I was without my learning support assistant and had support from my tutor, but it became clear I needed the support of my learning support assistant, so this was given sporadically and thankfully passing the first year. When starting my second year, I was able to ask lots of questions for support and how it would be in place for me, and was very pleased a separate room was given for my learning support assistant and my personal carer. During lockdown, 4 of my personal assistants left me. I was not only feeling like it was personal, but had to go through advertising for new staff. This would have left me totally without support, but thankfully my mum and our emergency cover lady both filled in all the hours until I can get new staff. Interviews were awkward due to not really wanting strangers in our home, but have managed to get a new member of staff. I enjoy my kids meeting as it keeps me on the right track in acknowledging what is acceptable behavior and attitudes from people due to my disability. I always feel I can speak openly.
Thank you, Jimmy, if that's everything. I'm going to ask MPs to write their questions into the box now, and let me know and indicate if you have any questions for Jimmy. We don't have any at the moment, but if we think of any that come through, please do write them in the box so that we can come to you to ask them. I guess the question is, from me as the chair of the APPG, is it would be really interesting to know what kind of what would the one thing be that would make a difference at this moment in time. So I'll write that in the box for you, Jimmy, as well. We do have a question from Sally Ann Hart, so if you would introduce yourself clearly, so for the benefit of the BSL interpreter, and please, Sally, please come in now if that's okay. I can't see you on the screen.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you, Jimmy, for that talk you did just there. What I would like to know is it was concerning to hear that you'd lost 4 learning support assistants during lockdown. So my question is, what support did you have during lockdown?
Brilliant. Okay, so we'll come to answers to those questions at the end of the meeting. So we're moving on to our next speaker, and I'm really pleased to welcome Carly Blake, no relation, a young person with cerebral palsy and learning difficulties. Carly is a young person from Portsmouth who is currently studying as an adult learner for her English and maths. She volunteers for a local charity shop and also works on a neurodiversity project. Carly enjoys watching her local team play football and likes attending matches at their home ground. Carly is an active part of the Kids Young People's Participation Team as well, and supporting their SEND youth voice across the country. So please welcome Carly.
Hello. I was at college with one-to-one support doing maths and English functional skills. We went into lockdown, things moved online. I'm not great with technology, so couldn't take part. My tutor was understanding that I couldn't do the work I felt isolated and couldn't complete everything for the course. I still passed, but wish I could finish properly. Because the college could support my needs, I did not need an EHCP, which is an education healthcare plan. Didn't have, but going back to college, that they didn't have the ability to support me, so I couldn't go back. If I had an education healthcare plan, they would have to put things in place. I have now gone back to a maths course. I was struggling, so they have now moved me into a learning difficulty course, which is what I needed. I really enjoyed the course before we were in,
and they understood.
And they understood and supported the transition onto the mainstream course. It was difficult. People didn't understand me and didn't talk to me. I still felt alone. It's not all doom and gloom. The new course is good and support works. I'm still worried that if we go back into lockdown, I can't access anything, and also about funding. During lockdown, kids supported me really well. We've had social meetings virtually, and also our meetings to hear the voice of young people with SEND. They gave me a call to help me get online and into the chats. We've talked as a group about COVID and our worries. We have fed these into the Department for Education, but we are happy to share some of these with you if it will help explain what young people are worried about when going back to school and college, and some of our ideas of what can help us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carly, and thank you for that offer. I think that would be really worthwhile for our review. Are there any questions from any of our MPs on the call? Okay, brilliant. We've got another question from our Vice Chair, Sally Ann Hart. So I'll come to Sally. If you could just introduce yourself again for
Carly, hello. Thank you for that. That was really informative, and I enjoyed listening to you, although it's obviously concerning that you've had some real issues accessing learning. I'm concerned that you couldn't take part. You said at the beginning of your chat there that you couldn't take part in work. So I wanted to know what was done, what adjustments were made to help you. And also congratulations on passing your exams, but will you be able to finish your course? Is that what you're worried about?
Okay, so we'll come to those answers at the end. So we've got just, I'll ask my question again. So just to ask, what one thing you would like to see changed, what do you think would make the biggest difference for you? Is there any other members of Parliament who would like to ask any questions at this stage? If not, we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much to our two young people who have spoken to us today, and particularly I'd like to also thank Kids, the organisation which helped facilitate that, so thank you for that. So we're just going to move on to our next speaker, who is a parent, Alison Dalthwaite, who is joining us today, is from Somerset and is a child of a is a parent of a child who uses AAC, augmentative and alternative communication. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. Hi. So I was going to start by explaining what AAC is, but I don't need to because Jimmy's just demonstrated. He uses eye gaze. My daughter, Etty, she can't use her eyes, but she accesses a computer to communicate using her hand. She doesn't have great accuracy, so it impacts how she's able to access learning very profoundly. I want to start off by describing our challenges in lockdown and how they relate to transition. The first thing I want to talk about, because to access learning, everything has to be differentiated for my daughter. She can use her computer to spell out words and construct sentences and answers, but she cannot hold a pencil, she cannot hold a book, she cannot access worksheets. So if there's a worksheet or a website that needs to be accessed, she can't do that independently. So when we went into lockdown, we struggled at home greatly to support her learning because nothing that came from school was made accessible for her. So there would be a task put up digitally, which would say, you know, look at this website, write a few sentences about your experiences with this or what you thought of it. But for my daughter, she would need us to access a website, press play, find, maybe create a grid on her computer so she could put the words in the right order. None of that was done from school. So her learning and ability to progress was massively affected by it. We don't, as parents, have access to that specialist software. That's all in schools with speech and language therapists. It's with the people who make the software. Secondly, I'd like to point out that the technical support was an issue. So if you want to do online learning lessons, hearing a voice output communication computer on Zoom and things like that, even though when school did put on lessons, that was not always very straightforward for it to be heard. And there wasn't anybody identified to help with that. So the computer is provided by the NHS, it's mounted on the wheelchair by a different version of the NHS. And there's a speech and language therapist who is in tasked with her communication, but how that is all comes together to enable access to learning is not really well clearly laid out who should be doing that. So technical support, we didn't really have it to make it work. In terms of transition, she was moving from year 11 to year 12, and it has caused all sorts of problems, meaning she has to go back to square one. So although she's returned to school now, none of those staff have been able to be properly trained in using her AAC because, as well as all the complications, they haven't wanted external therapists to go in, and so her TAs do not now, they're not being trained yet to properly support her. And this just exacerbates a problem that happens anyway with transition for children like my daughter, where each year when you change over to a new staff team. It's almost like go back to square one, retraining all the TAs, unless you're lucky enough to have continuity, which is quite rare. Our solution, we're extremely lucky. My daughter has some money, which we have paid for some specialist support for our daughter, for literacy support, because we couldn't physically make all the resources. And we found online that there are places in the country. There's an organisation called Candle who specialise in supporting the literacy and the development of AAC users, but it's a postcode lottery. Some are LAs like Devon, that's standard. If you're an AAC user, you get it. In our county, you don't get it. And we're lucky, not everybody obviously can do that. We've been able to do that for our daughter in case of another lockdown, but that sort of provision, I think that needs to become standard across the country for AAC users, where an AAC using child gets, support from an extremely specialist organisation who can differentiate resources, make sure staff are trained and put that in place. So 3 things I think could make it better. I think there needs to be, as I say, some kind of oversight from some structure to make it fair across counties, so that AAC users get a skilled designated resource maker for them. And then whether they're learning at home or school or one class or another class, it can carry on. Number 2, I think there needs to be some sort of national guidance over what provision is. At the moment, I think they've got to the point where there's some guidance around actually getting access to a computer, but how that computer is resourced and supported is not. And number 3, I think sort of oversight, so a key worker type person who can see them across the transitions to help avoid this going back to square one would help. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you, Alison. That was really, really insightful contribution. Would any members of Parliament like to ask a question at this stage of Alison? Anyone? I'm not seeing anyone indicate. So what I would like to ask really is about, I think you're absolutely right to highlight how, you know, in so-called normal times, there is that back to square one kind of issue. Do you think that going forward, there's more that we can learn from this kind of COVID situation that we're in to make sure that that's properly challenged going forward from this? Do you think that we could make more of an ask for that to be looked at as we move out of COVID?
Definitely I do. I think for young people, when there's this sort of complex multi-involvement, I think the transition needs to start like a half term before a summer. That doesn't put everything in place, but I think that should become like a standard practice so that people can be trained up before. When it's left to September, I know it's difficult, schools are under such intense pressures, but when it's left to September, that child is constantly losing probably about half term every year. Obviously this, as you say, COVID has been a huge impact, but it does happen again and again anyway.
I think one thing that we've been saying throughout this is that this has been holding up a magnifying glass to the issues that already existed. So it's really, really welcome to kind of hear your contribution. Does any other member of Parliament want to come in at this point to ask a question? No, in that case, I think we'll move on to the next speaker, but if anyone thinks of any other questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat box. So next we have Alison Marshman. Oh, I'm so sorry, it was too many Alisons. Alice Marshman, who is also a parent. Alice is a barrister and a parent of 2 primary aged children, the eldest of whom has diagnoses of ASC and ADHD, and has recently begun a placement at a specialist provision after almost 18 months out of school. So welcome, Alice, and over to you.
Hi, thank you. As Olivia said, my eldest son has only just gone back into education after a very long period that predated COVID by almost a year, where he was at home with me. And so obviously I couldn't work, and his learning in terms of his academic development was naturally limited because I'm not a teacher. And yet, as many families across the country found out during COVID, I was expected to take on the role of being a teacher as well as being a parent. And one of the things I wanted to focus on was what someone referred to me as being the hidden transitions that SEND children go through. Because for my child, going back to school was always going to involve a huge transition, even without COVID, because he had been out of school for so long. And really sadly, my case is not unique. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of children across the country who are transitioning back into education, quite apart from the COVID situation. And more worryingly, perhaps, are children who are not able to undergo those transitions because there simply aren't the places available for them. So in a sense, we were fortunate because my son has been able to go to a specialist provision for children with ASC. But, you know, I say fortunate, I had to fight the local authority twice in order to get to that position. And that is exhausting as a parent and requires a significant amount of social and financial capital that many, many parents just don't have. So I would say that one of the biggest issues with COVID was the sudden overnight cessation of any form of support that we had as a family. And we didn't really have very much to begin with, because there isn't really a lot out there for children, certainly with autism, that I found. And all the support we did have that I had managed to put in place was just gone. And I think over the entire period of lockdown, I had one phone call from the school where he was on the roll, although he was getting what's termed alternative provision. But other than that, I had no contact from the local authority or from social services, disability team or anything like that to find out how we as a family were coping. And the answer was just about. And then there's nothing in terms of transparency or accountability in terms of the support or the absence of support, because again, I use the word fortunate advisedly, but my son is fortunate in that he's now in a provision where he will be having tailored and targeted support to fill in the gaps in his learning. But I am conscious that there are many children who are going to be transitioning back without that level of targeted support, because children with SEND are already falling behind, and this situation of COVID is only going to make that more profound. And they're going to require significantly more investment in the transition process in order for them to even begin to catch up. And from what I've seen, there isn't really much thinking going into how SEND children are going to need specific and targeted support in sort of the academic arena, quite apart from the sort of social and emotional mental health side, which obviously all children are going to need, but I would say even more so for children with SEND, because as we've heard from the young people today, the support that they required in order to access learning and to live as independently as possible was disappeared, and that is devastating. I can't really overstate that enough. And trying to get that support and navigate what is often a Kafkaesque system, where I think Alison was saying that it's a complete postcode lottery. Well, sometimes support is available, but no one tells you about it. So you have no idea what you're actually entitled to and what your child could get. People, it's almost as if they're hiding it from you because they don't want to tell you what is out there. And obviously that is no help to you or your child. But I think one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that when we talk about SEND and there are reviews into SEND, and the discussion seems to be about fixing a problem, but ultimately what we're talking about are children. And I'm very, and young people, very clear that my child is not a problem to be fixed. A system has systematic problems, but my child is a person, not a problem. And I think that needs to be remembered.
that is an exceptionally powerful point, Alice, and thank you for your contribution there. There's lots of issues that you raised. I'm just going to ask my colleagues if any of them have a question for you. If you could just write in the chat box if you do. And if not, I will jump straight in with a question from me. You mentioned about the transparency and accountability at the moment. Is there anything that you think we could be doing as the APPG to support trying to open that up a bit, or what would you like to see in that kind of area to make sure that people are aware and held to account on these issues?
I think that in terms of accountability, I think both schools and local authorities, there needs to be some comeback when they don't fulfil their legal obligations, which happens routinely. So in our case, although my son has significant difficulties in accessing education to the point where he couldn't stay in school, the local authorities still refused an assessment for an education and healthcare needs assessment on the basis of what I later found out were unlawful criteria, which I know they continue to apply. But there is no comeback. There's nothing I could do. I mean, we were successful in our appeal, but no one has challenged them on using that. And so other parents trying to get support for their children continue to be told, no, your child isn't eligible because they don't meet this and they don't meet that. My background's in law, so I knew that that didn't sound right to me. So I looked into it and I realized it was wrong and I challenged it. But for other people, they're not in a position to do that. But there needs to be some sort of comeback. And I keep saying this, I don't know what the right phrase would be, but if you go to court and you lose and you're not in the tribunal system, then there's a cost sanction. There needs to be some sort of sanction for local authorities and for schools who similarly, but not identically, don't support children in the way that they're supposed to. But sometimes, and I found this in relation to my son's school, they were doing what they could and they were doing their best, but they simply didn't know what they should be doing. And they didn't know what the local authorities should be doing. And they didn't understand how to challenge and how to push back and how to say, actually, we can only do our job if you do your job. And so what happens is the child and the parent get stuck in the middle with everyone playing a game of pass the parcel, but the music never ends.
Okay, well, we have another question for you, if that's okay, from Sally Ann, if Sally could come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Alice, that was really interesting, and I heard it. I mean, I feel so strongly that parents with children with special educational needs shouldn't have to fight for the right support that their child needs. And it really, I hear it time and time again, parents like you. I mean, I've got two members of the family in two parts of my family who had to fight to get their children support. So it's actually, I completely understand where you're coming from. It makes me so angry. And you are in a much better position than so many other people because you're a lawyer. So you know how to fight and you know where to go, etc., etc. And you found it a struggle. So that's something I think we've got to put a stop to, is parents having to fight for the right support for their children when that support should be given. Every child deserves the right support and deserves a good education. So I heard you mention alternative provision. So your son, he's in another school now that caters for the specific needs that he has. And there's a new APPG group set up, and I think, Olivia, they're going to get in touch with you because there's a lot of crossover. But it's an APPG group for alternative provision, and it's set up with the Centre for Social Justice. So I think that's probably something that perhaps there may be some crossovers, Olivia, in due course. But just to let you know that it might be worth you maybe getting in touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's a whole lot of issues around the quality of alternative provision that's being provided to what are very vulnerable children.
And that is one of the things, and the outcomes and the quality of alternative provision is something we're going to be looking at in that APPG group.
Okay, yeah. I think that's important.
Thank you for that. So thank you to both our parent speakers. It's a really difficult thing to share your experience, and I'd just like to say a massive thank you for doing so. It really, really is valuable, and we are wanting to hear from as many parents in this process as possible. Moving on to our next speaker, we have Polly Sweeney, who is a partner at Rook Irwin Sweeney, the public law. So Polly is a lawyer specialising in education, community care, healthcare and medical treatment, with a particular interest in cases involving children and young people. She is chair of the Law Society's Mental Health and Disability Committee. So welcome, Polly, and over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on such an important topic, and I'm particularly pleased to have been able to speak after Jimmy, Carly, Alison and Alice, because I agree it's so important that we have the voices of young people and families in this discussion. I was able to come and speak to the APPG in July about the judicial review, which sought to reinstate the legal rights of children and young people that were downgraded as a result of the pandemic. And although those rights have now been fully restored, the pandemic has hit a statutory system that was already in crisis. And COVID-19 has only further intensified the issues which children and young people and families are facing. I would like to focus on three particular areas that I am seeing through my work which relate to transition. And so first of all, although the rules relaxing timescales that were introduced by the government came to an end on the 25th of September, we're seeing a really significant backlog in assessments and decisions regarding issuing of amended EHC plans, including for children and young people who are going through transitions to college or to post-19 provision. And I'm aware of one local authority that is still working through assessments from November. And these decisions are vital in ensuring successful transitions between phases of education. And although this was a problem pre-COVID-19, it was inevitable that the consequence of relaxing these timescales was that we were going to be faced with a huge backlog once those rights came back into force again. And currently, despite this being an inevitable consequence, we have very little guidance from central government about how local authorities are supposed to manage this backlog that they now face. My view is that what needs to happen as a matter of urgency is for there to be up-to-date data gathered on each local authority area as to the scale of this problem so it can be properly understood, and then action plans put in place. And I really think that some ring-fenced targeted funding is needed for these local authorities to help them to be able to get on top of this backlog. I know one of the challenges that local authorities face is getting the advice and information that they need from their partners in health. So for example, speech and language therapy, physiotherapy, occupational therapy. Our NHS colleagues at the moment are just not able to meet that demand, but local authorities need that advice and information to complete these assessments. If some targeted funding could be made available, local authorities could go to other third parties, other therapists to provide that input as part of the assessment process in order to speed this up. And staggering amounts of money are being given out by this government at the moment, with very little procurement behind that. My view is that some of that must be targeted specifically for children and young people with special educational needs. And I think it's important to recognise, as already been said, these delays are breaches of the law, and there needs to be much greater monitoring of where these breaches are happening. And it shouldn't just be left, as so many have already said, shouldn't be left just to parents to enforce these legal duties. So I think the second area and second theme from my work that has happened as a result of the pandemic is that many parents and children, young people themselves want to return to education placements this autumn, but they are still facing real barriers to accessing learning, even though all of the rights, legal rights, have been restored. And so I'm seeing in my practice too many cases where schools are applying blanket policies which are having discriminatory effects. And so I've seen, for example, generic letters being sent out where children are being asked to sign up to COVID-19 behavioural policies, which include social distancing, which are things which some children, young people with SEND just aren't able to adhere to. And as has already been raised as well, there is an absence of targeted catch-up support, which is specifically aimed at children with special educational needs, who have faced many, many months of being out of education because they haven't been able to access the online programmes that have been made available. We're also seeing lots of cases where provision which is outlined in a child or young person's EHC plan isn't being delivered. So provision of one-to-one teaching assistant support or therapeutic input, which is seen to be hands-on, is still not being carried out. I completely understand that schools are undoubtedly in a hugely challenging position, trying to balance the safety and needs of all of their learners. But the government has made a decision that all children should be in school. And that means that all children with special educational needs need to have the provision in their EHP plans delivered. And it isn't fair that this is just left to schools to deal with on their own. I think local authorities need to play a much more proactive role in making sure that plans are being implemented, making sure that schools have got the support that they need to be able to deliver this. And again, it shouldn't then be left to parents to have to enforce their legal rights and their children's legal rights to ensure that the plan is being delivered. And then finally, I just wanted to recognise the second group of parents. And I talked about the group of parents who really want their children and young people to be going into school at the moment. But there is this group of parents whose children, or perhaps people that are living in their household, have previously been in the extremely clinically vulnerable group and who are still really nervous about sending their children back to school and whether they're going to be safe. And the attendance data showing a significant increase in absence rates. I think since September, that's been between 87 and 90%. So that's 10% of children not in school at the moment. And there's no data around how many of those children have special educational needs. And there's a real lack of visibility over what provision and what support is being provided to those children to be making sure that they are able to access appropriate education to meet their needs whilst they're at home. I'm also concerned that the government's very rigid approach, which is encouraging the strict enforcement of fines and penalties, is in some cases forcing parents to remove their children from the school role completely and deciding to electively home educate. And again, there's a real lack of visibility about what education that particular group of children and young people are receiving. And so I think at the moment there needs to be much greater monitoring and collection of data around the reasons for absence and what's being done to make sure that that group of children are properly supported during this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. You've really highlighted a lot of key issues there, but also quite a lot of solutions, which is really helpful. I'm just going to ask colleagues if anyone has a question on anything that Polly's raised. I can't see anyone indicating, unfortunately. So I'm just going to ask really what you think would be the best kind of approach to this reporting on the backlog, and what you'd feel would make that a bit more robust, because I think you're absolutely right on what you were saying around that, and I just wanted to know a bit more.
I think that it's difficult because local authorities know that they're in breach of the law, and I don't think kind of hitting them with a stick is necessarily going to solve this problem, but we really need to have proper transparency about the scale. And I know that local authorities do, or a lot of local authorities do, keep this information. And so the Department of Education should be going to each individual local authority and saying, what is your current backlog? What are the reasons for that backlog? And what support can we give you to help you get through that and to help you tackling it, rather than just leaving them on their own to try and work through this? Because I really fear that it could be years to get back on top of this unless some really urgent intervention is provided.
Very, very salient point there. We've got Sally and Hart again wanting to come in. Sally, can I over to you?
Thank you, Olivia. What I was just going to ask is, Polly, you mentioned about data needed on reasons for absence. Is that something the schools would keep anyway? So would that be quite easy to collate that sort of data that could be fed in? Because it is concerning. Obviously, parents are worried about the vulnerability of their children. And if they're taking them off the roll and keeping them at home, there should be some follow-up by the local authority as to what that their children are getting the right education. But obviously, are they going to be doing that at the current period in time? That's the worry, isn't it? So I just wondered where the data would come from, probably the schools.
And there'll be two sets of data. There'll be children who, first of all, who are on a school roll. And there's absence code guidance, and that has been updated. So there's now specific absence codes for COVID. So if a child is off school because they're self-isolating, that code will be shown. But I don't think that those absence codes really get to the heart of the reasons, because ultimately either a head teacher will say, this is authorised for medical reasons, and that could be anything. That could be the flu, or it could be a child who's got severe anxiety in relation to attending school, or special educational needs that are preventing them from attending. But it also, or the head teacher can say unauthorised. And I think a lot of these absences at the moment are just being recorded as unauthorised, but we don't know the reasons behind that. And so I think more needs to be done in terms of the particular recording and looking behind the absence data to understand what is going on in a way which we're not able to do at the moment. And then for the second cohort, which is the children whose parents have elected to home educate and taken them off of the school roll, parents do have a legal duty in those circumstances to be making sure that their child is receiving full-time education which is suitable. And local authorities ought to be looking in and checking that's happening. But there is, I think, certainly the cases that I see, I'm really not sure that's actually happening.
Well, thank you, Polly, for your contribution. We're going to move back to Jimmy, if that's okay, Jimmy, to answer the questions that were put earlier in the session. So over to you.
To help make a difference, now I've had to advertise for more personal assistance with little to no luck.
Well, thank you for that. And to Carly as well, to respond to the questions.
Okay, so the first question Carly would like to answer was the question about adjustments and support.
The college didn't do anything to help me do work or access online, but my tutor was understanding that I couldn't do it. Kids used Teams and they did a talk through with me, and now as a group, our YPPT have helped create a guide to access Teams for young people. We have started sharing with other young people's groups.
And the second question that Carly was asked was around, was there anything else that put her off applying for an EHCP?
I actually did put in a request for an EHCP, but because the college could support me, they said I did not need one and rejected my application. This meant I was not a priority for support when going back and had nothing to back me up. I just want to say something else. It's good that you have wanted to listen to parents and young people, but now something needs to happen. For me, young people need to be heard. Government and local areas need to listen and take note. We are experts and can help provide answers. Young people can join Kids Network. We will help them be heard and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both Jimmy and Carly. Once again, you've been really excellent today, and it's been really good to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure that you're speaking for many more young people. So I'd also like to thank Kids again for arranging for you to be on this call today. We're near the end of the meeting. I can't believe an hour has gone already. I've been really enjoying the discussion today. Well, just to hear what the issues are and what we can do hopefully going forward. But just a reminder that if you have any issues, you can contact your local MP about any individual difficulties that you might be experiencing in the Ascend system. As the APPG, unfortunately, we're unable to take up individual casework. The next meeting will be on the 11th of November at 2 p.m. and we will focus on social, emotional and mental health difficulties, a broad area of need. All are welcome to join for that, and a link to register is in the chat and on the website. If you would like to speak at a future meeting, please register your interest, as we are keen to hear from a wide range of individuals and organisations, from parents, different support organisations and young people. The link will be posted in the chat for you to contact us to ask to speak. Written submissions need to be submitted by the 15th of November. Please, the link and the terms of reference of this review and inquiry are posted in the chat as well. Please follow us on Twitter at APPG_SEND and sign up to our mailing list to keep in all the info via the website, which is www.naht.org.uk/APPG SEND. Always a challenge for me to spell out loud, but there we go, and that should be in the chat box as well. Finally, a thank you to our speakers today for sharing their stories. We really are grateful for you for taking the time to do that and the willingness to share your experiences and also give your opinions on what should happen. It really has been inspiring and helpful to hear what you think we should be doing next. And thank you so much for everyone, all the MPs on the call who've attended today and asked questions. We hope you will come along to future meetings of the APPG. And also thank you to everyone who's attended today. We've had over 100 participants on the call throughout the call. So hopefully you've got something out of today. Please do feed into the inquiry if you can, and you are more than welcome at all our future meetings. So thank you for attending today.